Guys, hey, welcome. Thank you so much for joining us on the Sports Matter podcast today. We have with us the amazing directors of the new Conor McGregor docu-series on Netflix, McGregor Forever. We have Darragh McCarthy joining us from Dublin and Liam Hughes, I believe, from LA. Is that right?
California. Yeah, I'm in the Bay Area right now, but I'm based in LA.
Gotcha, Bay Area. Well, guys, thanks so much for joining me. I absolutely loved this new peek behind the curtain of all things Connor. But before we get into that, just tell me a little bit about yourselves. How did you get started as a storyteller? Darragh, do you want to go first?
Yeah, sure. I started out as a cameraman. I've worked a lot in television, a lot in sports, and then earlier on in my career did a lot of music, a lot of rock and roll stuff, and then the sports stuff. It's really, sports wouldn't necessarily be a passion of mine as much as say music would be, but I think I suppose sports and music share a lot in common. Especially at this level, at the level of say a Conor McGregor, and the stadium highs of it's actually quite a similar world in a lot of ways. And then I got into a lot of sports like with Irish teams, rugby, soccer. Got to see a bit of the world, and that kind of brought me to kind of my introduction to Conor.
Awesome. Yeah, I love that sports and music connection. I wanna talk more about that. But Liam, tell us how did you get hooked up with Darragh? How did you get your start as a filmmaker and working with religion of sports and all of it? Let's hear your story.
Well, I was a theater kid and a sport and an athlete growing up. So ending up in sports documentaries has kind of brought my storytelling, my passion for storytelling, and passion for sports together. I came through the scripted world and kind of stumbled into documentaries, and I've absolutely loved it. I'm just kind of fascinated by the human experience in general, and the opportunity to study the human experience has been really amazing for me. That's kind of how I see documentaries. And I've been working with religion of sports for a couple of years now. I've worked closely with Gotham Chopra on a number of projects, and this being the first really big one that I kind of led creatively for religion of sports. And was lucky enough to work very closely with Darragh throughout the process.
That's awesome. Very cool. What sports did you play growing up? Did you have a specialty?
Soccer. I was a one sport athlete. I played through college I went to University of Edinburgh and played for their team there. That was as far as I got.
Okay, well, you have some international overlap. Scotland, Ireland, roads circling back around.
Yeah.
I wore my Ballybunion Irish golf hat today. Just
Oh, nice, nice.
yeah, as a tribute. I love Ireland. I was born in Oklahoma, but last name Sheehan. Way back when. Fully Irish family, and look to get back there soon. So yeah, Darragh, tell me more. Like I love this idea of at this level that sports and music are so similar. Expand on that for us a little bit. Like, how do you capture these giant personalities? How do you show? How do you balance the human side, the nuanced side, with like the brand, right? With like the thing
Mm.
that a team of people want to present and protect. But as a filmmaker, it's your job to kind of pierce through that a little bit and share a more real side
Mm.
with the world.
Yeah, I think one of the earlier names for this, documentary, it went through different iterations, and there was, this is like a 3-year process really, and I think Liam actually came up with the name, and it was Conor McGregor, as real as it gets. I mean, that's what you get with Conor. You don't, you can think some of it is performative and some of it is bravado, but like this guy is, this is how it is. This is the world is his stage. I think, say even if you go back to like a musical performance, like big rock show or something in a big stadium, a fight at that level, it's the same. It's that big show. It's that energy, and that's really what people get to see in that moment. Is this huge drama unfolding in the arena. So I think when telling that story, what's actually interesting is the stuff, it's that backstage, it's the behind the curtain, as you said. That's what people really want to see. People want to know, is that what this guy is like? Is it, what that's what people like, what's he really like, and I think that's what has been the most exciting part of this process is kind of bringing the viewer into that and giving them a glimpse of what that is like behind the curtain.
You were involved, if the audience might not know, you were involved with the first film about Conor McGregor, Notorious. You were a shooter on that. And I watched both to prepare for this. And I really kind of noticed, I think, Conor's evolution as maybe um, a more introspective person. Like he's certainly brash, right? He's never going to lose that that edge, that thing that makes him who he is. But I think what you guys captured really well in this docu series is, it wasn't just look at me, I'm going to make it to the top of the mountain. It was here's a man who's really sort of considering why does he do what he does, what's the legacy going to be. I feel like we really did see a human side to him. So in your own words, you tell me, like, how do you feel things have changed from that first film to now?
I think you described, a man who's like, I'm gonna get to the top of that mountain. Like he is at the top of that mountain. That's where that's where the series McGregor Forever, really starts. It starts, we show a glimpse into the Mayweather, the Maymac, cultural phenomenon that was that super fight. And and I think that's really, thematically, and that's really what makes this series so interesting. Is it's you've got to the top, so what does that look like, and because whether it's sports or whatever field, the dream is to get to the top. Well, what does that dream look like? What happens next? What drives you to keep going? And I think for me that's the big difference between the two, because in Notorious, director Gavin Fitzgerald showed an incredible trajectory. We're all familiar with Conor's historic run through the UFC and mixed martial arts. So yeah, this series just starts at a different period, and I think there's a lot to be gotten from that.
Yeah, and I think it kind of comes back to a common theme in sports and levels and athletes at this level, which is that it's easier to get there than to stay there. And now don't get me wrong, it's very hard to get there. It takes an incredible mentality and work ethic to get there. But once you're there, and this is something we touch on in the series, is like it comes with all this stuff that you didn't expect and that you could never prepare for. The wealth, the fame, the notoriety, everybody watching your every move, analyzing your every move, questioning your every move. And nobody can prepare for that. Nobody can prepare for that. And I think that's, I watched Notorious as research when I first started working on this project. And that's certainly the difference that I noticed is like Conor was free as a bird when he was on that run. You know what I mean? He was taking the world by storm. And he didn't have a lot of the pressures that he experiences on a daily basis now. And I think that became a big part of our series, was really exploring what it's like to be at the top, and how hard it is to stay there and maintain that level.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, it's the pressure, it's the fame, it's the comfort, right? He went from being the son of a plumber, right, who had to just grind to get out of, what they call it, the council flats, or right, like basically like welfare. And now look at him, right? There's that famous Marvin Hagler quote: "It's tough to get out of bed and do road work at 5 a.m. when you've been sleeping in silk pajamas." Like, do you think that has affected him in some ways? I mean, I know we see in this docu series him grinding and him psyching himself up, and he's obviously been beset by tough injuries. But do you think, like, subconsciously he maybe isn't grinding like he used to, right? Like it's hard when you have this level.
Well, I think it is subconscious. It's definitely something I've thought about a lot because the evidence is in the footage. The guy works so hard. He works so hard. He's always in the gym, 2 sessions a day, 3 sessions a day. I mean, you just like the evidence is in the footage that Darragh captured over the course of 3 years. But, the results have changed. So you have to ask yourself, what has changed, and what has changed is his circumstances. I don't think it's the work ethic. I think it's the circumstances in which he works, and he at this stage in his life. So it's a tough question, and that's really the question that we honed in on is since Mayweather, since his life changed and he got all the wealth and all the fame. The question that has dogged him is, why are you here? Why are you still doing this? And I think that's ultimately a question he's had to ask himself a lot as well. But again, the work ethic hasn't changed. It's really just the circumstances of his life that have changed. That's what I saw.
Darragh, your thoughts on that? Why do you think he does what he does? Like, what is it about the fight game for him?
I think the man is obsessed with it. Like there is nothing that excites him more than, like as Liam says, he loves the training. He's constantly in the gym. A lot of footage is, there's some great stuff of him just in the gym, just getting it done. Team members are coming or going at different various stages of camps, and you see him in there. When it's just himself, he's getting something done. In the scene where he breaks his toes, like after that scene happened, I wasn't there, but like he was training again after this. So I mean, you'd really have to ask Conor why, but I mean, there is just no. He just needs to do it. He needs to do it, and I think that will never change.
Right. It's identity. It's the only thing he knows. Yeah, which I think kind of gets us to this question, this crossroads that the film docuseries deals with. It's like when is it time to call it quits, right? How often have we seen the greats try to walk away, and they often can't, right? It's such a struggle because on the one hand, it's the identity and the only thing they've ever known. On the other, everything else, right? Long-term health, quality of life, the next chapter, protecting your legacy. Which one do you guys think it is right now? Like, do you think he's gonna tie it on again? Who is it? Michael Chandler? That's who they're talking about right now. Do you think that's in the cards, or where do you think Conor's at?
Certainly seems like it's in the cards. I would love to see that fight, but I think that in a lot of ways, Conor's earned the right to fight for as long as he wants. I mean, that's the way I see it. You know what I mean? His legacy, and he says it in the series, is set in stone. He was the first double champion. He was a big part of building the UFC into what it is today. His legacy is set in stone. And if he wants to go out and fight for another 5 years, if he never won another fight, his legacy is still set in stone, as far as I'm concerned. But, he's a competitor, and losing sucks. Losing really sucks. And so I think that we've seen certainly I've seen that has, I think it's been hard for him to not have the results he wants in the octagon. But I think that for Conor, there's no better feeling in the world other than maybe the feeling he gets with his family and his children than walking to that octagon, setting foot inside of it, standing across from another man and fighting him like that. Well, there's nothing that can replace that for him. And so I think he's just going to keep doing it for that reason alone, for the thrill and the, and again, I think he's earned that. I think he's earned that right.
1,000%. Darragh's like you were saying. I mean, he's a rock star, right? That walking into the octagon is like walking out on the stage. That rush, I can't even imagine what that's like. And yeah, I guess just to take a step back, I mean, I'm old enough that I remember when the UFC was not mainstream at all. And in fact, a lot of places were like, what is this blood sport? Our kids shouldn't be watching it, right? It was really on the fringe. And me personally, Connor was the guy who brought me into that world, right? He was super relatable. He was this underdog. He talked so much trash and it was hilarious. And he had those, moments that went viral. And yeah, I mean, he really grew the sport more so than anybody. And no disrespect to the greats that preceded him, the Gracies and Chuck Liddell and Anderson Silva's, but Connor was the guy who really made it go mainstream. And look at it today, right? Like when there's a fight, ESPN, every show, Get Up, Sports Center is like focused on that. And 20 years ago, that was far from the case. So yeah, totally his legacy is cemented. I agreed with that. But yeah, right. It's tough because it's not like, religion of sports. Tom Brady retired a couple times, and football is a dangerous sport, but he could go out and do it in a way where he pre-read the defense and he could get rid of the ball in 2.5 seconds and kind of minimize, the physical limitations he has as a 45-year-old. You can't do that in an octagon. Right.
No, there's no escape in the octagon. I mean, you're literally standing across from another man in your jocks, and that's it. That door closes, and I mean, there's no escape.
And it's the training as well, by the way. I mean, Tom Brady goes to practice and he doesn't get hit. Connor goes to practice and he's sparring, and you've seen the cauliflower ears on these guys. It wears on you. And so I think it's the training as well as the competition in MMA that these guys have to consider.
Absolutely. Yeah, I listen to JJ Redick's podcast all the time, Old Man and the Three, and he said that was the reason that he finally retired from the NBA. It wasn't the games. It was getting in game shape. That it's hard. It's a grind.
Yeah.
That's the thing you do. And now he has all these other, like you said, considerations. I mean, he's a businessman. He's a ambassador, a global ambassador for Ireland. I mean, he's so many things now that, yeah, I imagine the hours in the day are tougher to come by than maybe when he was on the come up.
Well, and you know what I see in Connor as well is he loves running those businesses. People like to talk about, oh, well, he has all these distractions and, is he not focused enough on fighting and this and that? And, I understand where people are coming from with that. But when you see the passion that Connor has for Proper 12 and for the Black Forge and all these businesses that he runs, like, they're not just any old businesses. They're things that he's really passionate about. And I think that that's something that he doesn't really get quite enough credit for. Yeah. And I think that, like, there's an element of his flashiness and stuff that some people don't really resonate with. They don't relate with, but, the guy loves his businesses, and they're all things he's very passionate about. Irish whiskey, Irish pubs, like bringing Ireland to the world. And so I think that, like, are they taking some of his attention away from fighting? Yes. Could that be affecting his results in the octagon? Yes, I think so. But he really loves running those businesses. And so I think that, I've certainly seen in him like this kind of pull almost between those commitments that he has, because he really does love all of them.
Right. And like you said, he's earned the right. Who is anybody to critique him? And I, as a fan, I'm certainly curious to see how this plays out over the next couple of years. I'd love to see him fight again, but at the same time, would completely understand if he calls it a day.
And you have to remember, like, in the decision to call it a day as well, obviously we've talked about, like, the injury aspect and the psychological aspect of wanting to do it. But I think something that, not all athletes have, but a lot of high-end ones, but certainly Connor has, is, like, people want to see him compete. People get excited when, even when there's rumblings of a fight, people are, this show comes out, like, the world was waiting for this docuseries, people were excited. You could see it online. People are like, wow, we want this. That is the star power that Conor McGregor has. Any of his brands, whether it's, you know, the whiskey, the stout he's just releasing. He's got a fitness app in McGregor Fast. He has his tidal sprays. You know, whatever he's doing, he is fully passionate. But when it comes to the fighting, you know, people, the world gets excited, and the world wants to keep it going.
And he knows that, and he loves his fans, and I think that he knows how much people love Conor McGregor fights, and that gets him going as well. That 100% gets him going.
Yeah, he's the ultimate showman, right? He's a modern day Ali, in a way.
And that's one thing we tried to capture in the series. You know, particularly with those kind of VFX sequences when the fights were announced, and you see the kind of the Twitterverse and the internet just going crazy whenever anything is announced, whether it's a retirement, whether it's a fight, whether it's, you know, him breaking his leg. Like every YouTuber is online recording their episode. You know, everybody's pulling up Twitter to say what they think. I mean, anything happens with Conor, and as Darragh says, the world just goes crazy.
Yeah, it sure does. Yeah, I like that idea. I'm remembering a quote where he talked about going mad like Vincent Van Gogh, right? Where it's you know, if he's lost his mind, but he's done it, you know, for his kids and his kids' kids, then it'll all be worth it. But he's there to paint a picture, right? That he's an artist in a way, and you know, I guess who's to say what a successful painting is, right? He could go out there and lose, and he's still giving the fans what he wants. He obviously wants to win. He's going to do everything he can to win, but you know, maybe that's part of his math, right? It's not just about winning now. I don't know. I'm speculating, rambling.
Yeah, I mean, look, the guy loves to compete. You know, he loves competition, and that was true then, and it's true now. You know what I mean? And I think like you raised that that Van Gogh quote. It's a device that we used in the series of tapping into old interviews to kind of create this contrast between past and present. You know, we basically dug through the internet and found all the old interviews we could, whether it was from old media scrums or interviews that he did, or you know, in a cafe in Portugal, or you know, before he was famous, whatever we could find, really to kind of, for me, it was to educate and inform myself about, you know, who this guy was, to help understand who he is now, you know. And I think that we found that we created some really interesting moments where what he said in the past was very relevant to what he's going through in the present. You know, and there are also things like that question of why do you do this that he's answered before and the answer is the same today. You know what I mean? So it was really interesting to, you know, live with this footage, all this verite footage that we had, and really experience what Conor is going through in the present, and then frame it through some of the things that he's said in the past when he was on the come up. I was really excited about that element of the series.
Yeah, I think you guys did a fantastic job balancing, like you said, the verite with the archival, and there was so much archival. I can only imagine. You said you worked on this for 3 years and delivered 4 hours. Yeah, what was it like, Darragh, to like process, you know, that amount of footage, right? How many note cards did you have on a wall, right? What were some of the darlings that got killed along the way, I guess?
There was, yeah, it was a huge amount of footage. I can't imagine that any other documentary would have had that much footage. But you know, as Liam was saying, the device of like going back to the old stuff really brought the verite. It really brought value to some of the verite footage. You know, some of the up to date footage, if you like, that we were capturing alongside with Conor, and you know, really kind of gave perspective to, at some moments, you know, footage that might seem pretty innocuous, but when you actually, you know, give it that perspective, it kind of tells a deeper story. You I'm a big fan of the verite style of shooting, especially in documentary. I love, long awkward silences. There's points in our film, like there's one point in the kitchen in Portugal where it's just after Habib is retired, and when that scene ends, you know I wish there was 4 seconds more of just the camera holding that bit longer. So it's kind of nice to live in moments, and just to observe and just to bring the viewer along. And I think what Liam was saying, he went through all this footage to kind of bring himself up to speed, and I think it was a really good device, using that alongside the footage we were capturing day to day.
I love that.
It was definitely a lot. It was definitely a lot to dig through, man. It was definitely a lot to dig through. This process began at a post house called Windmill Lane in Dublin in November 2020. I flew over there and sat in an edit bay with Darragh for 5 weeks and just went through a lot of the footage that he had captured up till that point, starting in summer of 2018. So it would have been 2 and a bit years, of footage that was already in the can at that point. And of course, at the time, Conor was getting ready to go to Dubai, Abu Dhabi, to fight Poirier. And so we were kind of starting to think about how to structure the series. And the first step was to go through all this footage that had already been shot. And I was like blown away, by the access, by the footage that Darragh had shot. It felt so insider. It felt so intimate. And there was so much of it, and, I think when it came to deciding what to include, there's a lot of training footage. Obviously, Conor trains a lot, so that was the kind of stuff that we felt like, okay, we're going to have these training moments. Obviously, he's going to be in camp. We're building towards fights in each episode. But the stuff that we knew we had to include was the stuff outside of training. When any moment with the family, any moment where he's, on an international tour talking to kids, any moment where he's in between the action that people can normally see, that's what we knew we had to include. So I would say in some ways, like, again, we figured out each episode was going to feature a fight. So we were kind of building towards a fight most of the time. And so there was obviously going to be fight week, leading up to and there was going to be a fight camp once the fight was set. But in between those sequences of kind of fight camp through fight night, everything outside of it was, I don't want to say the most interesting, because the fight weeks are also very interesting in terms of seeing which kind of version of Conor shows up each time. But everything in between was really the hardest, I would say, to craft. Because we only had so much screen time and there was so much amazing footage. So that was the most difficult job, I would say, was everything outside of the fights themselves.
Well, look, I think you made excellent creative choices, because, going to exactly what you're saying, it's like the world, we all know the super confident, cocky Conor. But what maybe we don't know, which I totally saw on watching this, was that humble side, right? That he's actually has a ton of humility, which your average fan would be like, what, Conor? No, he doesn't. But he does, right? Like after one of those losses, he's just like, well played, right? I got beat. And you can see that pain in there. And then, to train again, to start over. Or that moment you said after Habib, right? In that silence, the hurt that he must have been feeling, because obviously he wanted that rematch. And then just to know he's not going to get it, seeing that human, that humble, that side, I think, kudos to you guys. Like, you really see him as a normal human being, right? Just like going through the same range of emotions that any of us would if we were world fight champions.
Yeah.
So you touched on, I just wanted to go back. Oh yeah, go ahead.
I was going to say, like, the normal human being thing, that's what's so fascinating to me. It's been kind of weirdly hard to process the reception of the series for me. And I was trying to think about why that was. And I think the reason is that, going into this project, I was like, oh my God, like Conor McGregor. This was easily the biggest star that I had ever worked with on a series about. And it was like, oh my God, Conor McGregor, ah. And over the course of 3 years of being in the edit, he kind of just became Conor McGregor. He became this human because I was able to see his humanity in the footage. And so when it came out and I realized that for everyone else, it was like, oh my God, Conor McGregor, the series about Conor McGregor. It was like, he was this larger than life thing again. It was weird for me to process because I was like, no, 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 no. He's just Conor. Like, he's just another human being having human emotions and going through a human experience. And that was really interesting to me.
Darragh, so I mean, you've known him here the longest. You've worked with him. How did this partnership come about? How did you link up with Liam and Religion of Sports and Netflix? And it looked like Pete Berg and Film 45 were involved too. Can you tell us a little bit about the
Yeah.
genesis of the partnership?
Yeah, so the partnership came through Audiotar, Connor's manager, and since we wrapped on Notorious, we'd always known that there was another. I personally I thought it was another feature, but when Netflix came into the discussion, and that was obviously with Pete and Gabe and Audie. And it was clear it was a 4-part series was what they were after, and so that kind of began the wheels turning of thinking about how that would look, how that would play out, because obviously the story was still being written at that stage. So I mean, I got speaking to Gautam Chopra in Religion of Sports, and we really felt that ROS were a great fit for partners on the story we were trying to tell. And obviously Gotham and the team have huge list of credentials behind them, and to really get the humanity out of this story, and to really bring the viewer into this world. I think it was a good partnership, and obviously then, as Liam said, we worked together. Initially it was just scene ideas on little post-its, and I actually have them downstairs. I found them. I was cleaning up Liam recently, and I have these hundreds of, and it's just each scene written out with a little synopsis. And we had Mike Donnelly, our producer, brought in like a big cork board, and it was just that was how it started. And that was at that stage we were we'd only really got up to episode 2 in the can at that stage, so it was still there was it was a lot to unfold. But it was just, for me, it was just a fascinating process of breaking down all this footage into these scenes in order of importance and interest to the through line we were trying to tell. And yeah, it was a really, really exciting process for me to get to do that. And yeah, like the structure that myself and Liam put down in those early days, a lot of that it still stands, and I think that's testament to the storytelling chops of all the team.
Yeah, that's so cool. I'd love to be a fly on the wall for those creative brainstorms. I'm glad you mentioned Gotham, another director on the project. What was it like for each of you to be filmmakers, storytellers in your own right? How were you able to find your groove as collaborating with one another's? Would you say there were specific roles you each took on, or strengths that you had? How did it work? Sort of all hands on deck.
Well, so I would say this. One of Gotham's great talents is the way that he connects with people. And, that has really been at the core of his work with Tom Brady, his work with Kobe, And it became clear early in this process that he wasn't really going to be able to do that with Connor. Um, and I genuinely, that's not a criticism of Connor. You know, I think that I see in him that he keeps his circle small. You know, that's been one of the keys to his success. I think that letting new people in a you know deep way is not something that he does very much, and certainly maybe not like a film director from LA. You know, so I think that for me, my part in this whole process really grew when we had to shift our creative approach here, because how we're used to doing things at ROS and how we kind of originally intended going into this project was to really sit down with Connor and get into it in interview, you know, and really reflect and commentate on what he's been going through. And like I say, one of Gotham's great talents is his ability to sit down with guys and really get them to reflect in a way that they maybe haven't before. And so at a certain point, you know, we had to pivot our approach because Connor, we couldn't get him in the interview chair, you know. And I think that what we learned is that wasn't really the approach that was going to work with Connor, you know. And you can't shoehorn every athlete into the same process, you know. Connor is one of the most present people that I've ever met, you know. From moment to moment, he knows exactly how he feels and he says exactly how he feels, you know. And so I started to see these when Darragh and I were first watching down footage. I started to see these OTF interviews, what we call OTF, on the fly, which is just like in the moment, right? In the moment, in the situation, where Darragh would grab Connor for 5 minutes after training, or he'd grab him for 5 minutes here, or he'd be walking to his car after the gym, and he would just have this moment of deep reflection. But he just wasn't going to sit down in a chair for 2 hours and do an interview. And so we really had to pivot, and that's where we, you know, started to go and find other ways that we could integrate his voice, which is how the you know the old interviews came into play. And we really started leaning more into this being a very verite driven documentary. And that's when we decided we were going to go and really interview his coaches, and that's where we decided that they were going to be voiceover only, and that we were going to really lean into Connor in verite, you know, and really seeing him exist with commentary from those closest to him. So, you know, Gotham, he obviously stayed involved all the way through. It was really, really valuable to have him keep more of a 30,000 foot view, to react to things and ideas as we brought them to the table. But, you know, my background when it comes to documentaries, I come from an editing background. And so it was a really cool opportunity for me to jump in and take a bigger role when we realized that we were really going to have to build this thing in the edit. So that was certainly my gestation on the project.
Yeah, that's a good point. You know, it hadn't even occurred to me as I was watching it that it didn't have as many as those traditional sit-down interviews. Darragh, you know, talk to us about that. Like, how do you, if you're following Connor, you know, day in, day out, how do you pick your moments, right? How do you know when it's a good time to, you know, try and go deep on a point versus like he's in his fight flow, I don't want to mess that up?
Yeah, certainly. I mean, I suppose, you know, you do need to pick your moments, but at the same time, I think, you know, although, as Liam said, you know, Connor wasn't interested in kind of, you know, sitting in an interview chair and kind of going through everything, but, you know, he's very present and very engaged in the moment. So, you know, it's not so much about picking your moment. It's more about actually, you know, being present in the moment and, you know, referring to what's going on, like, you know, where are we, what, you know, how does this feel, how does it, like, it's, so I suppose in that regard, you know, it's it's just it actually made the film more interesting from my mind. You know, like I love sit down interview led, you know, documentaries. I think it's a great tool. And but you know, you do see it a lot, especially in sports documentaries. And I think, you know, the approach of kind of, you know, early on there was a lot of pivoting done on how this documentary was to be approached. And you know, there was a point where we realized this, you know, this classical, you know, tried and tested approach isn't necessarily going to work with this guy. Uh, and and you know, and I think by pivoting, that really lets the viewer into this world more, and really shows Connor in his element a lot more. And I think, yeah, I just think it made for a much more interesting film.
I totally agree. I mean, well, look, it's the old maxim, show, don't tell, right? And I think a lot of the reason you see these sit down interviews is because you're dealing with these, you know, superstars that don't have the time to give. And it's so much easier to just knock out what you want in an hour or 2 hour sit down interview. And, you know, you typically don't get the access that you guys had to follow him around like you did. I mean, most athletes wouldn't grant that. So, you know, you must be doing something right to have worked with him all these years. I'm sure you had a screening with him before, you know, a cut was sent over to Netflix. Was that nerve wracking at all? Like, how did he respond to the initial cuts of the film?
Yeah, it was certainly nerve wracking. And he certainly had, you know, he had other ideas to bring to the table. And he, you know, as Liam said, like he, you know, he's not afraid to tell you what he thinks. So there was some re-edits went back and forth, but ultimately, you know, I think, you know, the film was its own thing and was allowed to kind of evolve as its own thing. And you know, Connor's involvement was very important in that. But I think, you know, Connor's input into the film was really in what Connor does. And I think, you know, from the editing point of view, you know, there was a few changes, but I think it was really just the overall feel of the film is where, you know, Connor brought his input and his vision into the piece. Um, excuse me. So yeah, and I think that comes through in the final showing. You know, it. You know, I'm very grateful to Connor for kind of allowing us this access into his world. You know, it's not an easy thing to do. You know, I mean, I don't think any of us here can imagine what it must be like to watch a documentary of, you know, the last 3 years of your life. Um, you know, it's certainly something that, you know, I commend and I have a lot of respect for. And I think, you know, yeah, it went well. The edit reviews went well overall.
Yeah,
And
well, not to mention
especially,
just
sorry, just to piggyback off what Darragh was saying, I think especially considering the season of his life that this series dealt with, like it was a hard time, man. Like he had some defeats in the octagon. He was really kind of his place in the UFC had changed, if you will. He was finding it harder to get fights. Yes, he was getting in some trouble outside the octagon. Like it was a difficult time in his life, and you know, I kind of had to remind myself of that at times. Like there was hands up, plenty of frustration, you know, on the religion of sports side throughout this process, and you know that we're not getting access, we're not getting this, we're not getting that, but like I had to constantly bring myself back and remind myself like it takes a lot of courage to do this. You know, it takes a lot of courage to open up your life to a camera, um, especially when you're going through a lot of the difficult things that he's been going through, growing family, you know, growing businesses, pressure, everything. It's a hard thing to do, and so I also, you know, having come out the other side of it, have a lot of admiration and gratitude for Connor for opening up his life in the way that he did.
yeah, I agree, and I was just gonna say to what Dara was saying, like the most poignant moments in the film were like, you know, having to do community service after what went down with Habib, right? Like being in that church and just like hearing him just sort of candidly talk about it, and you know, again, doing it with this like humility and this grace. was a whole new side. And then, yeah, the access to D and the, having kids and becoming a father and seeing him just really relish, being a father, was really cool. So amazing stuff. We're getting towards the end of our time, so we'll wrap it up. But I'd love to hear a little bit what's next. What are you both working on now, if you can talk about it?
Yeah, I can go first. I'm co-directing a feature doc right now about the NBA G League. It's for Amazon Prime. They announced it on a couple weeks ago in the trades. So very excited about that. It's going to be a 2-hour feature. We're following 5 athletes across the 2022-2023 G League season. So it's an inside look at life in the G League, which is growing a lot. So this is a really cool time to be doing this project. We're partnering with Bill Simmons of The Ringer and Amazon, of course, and the NBA to bring this one together. So it's been really fun. It's coming out in August, I believe, August 9th or something. During NBA Summer League, they want to release it.
Amazing. That is right up my alley, and I hope to be able to speak with you again when that drops. I got the good fortune of meeting Scoot Henderson and his entire family, and they're great. His sisters, who were like running like every aspect of his life and keeping him out of trouble, was really cool. So hopefully you got some of that in there. Darragh, what's on your radar right now?
Well, there's a few things kind of in development, but there's nothing really kind of at a stage that I'm like privy to talk about here. But certainly, maybe if we expanded the scope of this podcast to a bit of music, maybe there might be something to talk about down the line.
There we go. I'm always down for a good music doc. It's becoming one of my questions just because of my own curiosity as a producer and a development guy. Are there any projects that got away? Any holy grail projects, whether they have been done already by somebody else or they haven't been done? What would be your like white whale?
God, I don't know.
For me, one of my favorite sports docs of all time is Senna. That is kind of the gold standard for me, but I think it's more so the idea of being handed, a hard drive full of beautiful 35 millimeter footage from, the 70s and 80s in any sport, I think would be pretty damn cool. So, this project was that in many ways for me. I love verite. Like Darragh said, I love just sitting with hours and hours and hours of footage and finding the meaning in it and finding the humanity in it and finding the story in it. So really any project where I can have verite footage to work with is my holy grail.
Awesome. Darragh, anything to add to that? Any favorite films as well? I mean, Senna is a great one, and Asif Kapadia also having done Amy, so another director living in both sports and music.
Yeah, I think that he's a fantastic director, and Senna is up there. I suppose Under the Sun is one of my favorite documentaries of all time. I think I spoke to Liam about this early days. It's it follows this North Korean family. It's by a Russian director. What's his name? Vitali something. But anyway, it's just like, if for cinema verite fans, like it's just an incredible watch. The first half an hour you're sitting there going like, what is this even going to start? It's just sitting in a moment, and the meaning that brings kind of really comes together at the end of the film. And it's a very interesting film.
I will 1,000% check that out. I have not seen it before. Gentlemen, thank you very much. Any social media handles, websites, other cool stuff the audience should know and follow?
religionofsports.com, at Religion of Sports. We definitely keep everybody updated with everything we got coming down the pipeline. So yeah, shout out Religion of Sports. And we're also branching out into music, by the way. And I think that, to kind of circle back to what Darragh said early on, I think that the common thread for us is greatness, right? It's high achieving human beings, and studying what it is that makes them great and how they got to where they got to. And absolutely, athletes, musicians, actors, businessmen. Some are more interesting than others. Boardrooms aren't as interesting as fight weeks, but at the end of the day, greatness is really kind of what we focus on. So definitely a lot of colliding worlds out there.
I love that. Very well put. Well, cheers to you both for taking the time to talk with us today. Very much appreciated. Everybody, please go check out McGregor Forever on Netflix and make sure to follow Darragh, Liam, and Religion of Sports to find out all the cool stuff that is coming next. Gentlemen, thank you.
Thanks very much, Trace. Appreciate it.
Thanks, man. Thank you.